Are you exhausted from trading your life energy for a paycheck at a soul-sucking job? Terrified you'll have to work until you drop just to pay the bills?
Yeah.
Society tells you that breaking free from this endless cycle requires a trust fund, blind luck, or inventing the next billion-dollar app. But the truth is, escaping the daily grind isn't about privilege. It's a simple, mathematically reproducible formula. 10 Lessons from Quit. Like a Millionaire reveals exactly how to optimize your spending, legally minimize your taxes, and use the power of index funds to build a portfolio that fully funds your lifestyle. Discover the exact step-by-step blueprint that will rescue you from the cubicle trap and buy back your freedom, health, and time.
I mean, it sounds almost too good to be true, right? Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, welcome. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today for you, the listener, is to basically map out the exact, mathematically reproducible steps the author, Christy, used.
Right.
She literally went from surviving on 44 cents a day in a rural Chinese medical waste dump to retiring as a millionaire at age 31.
It's just an incredible, almost unbelievable trajectory.
Totally.
And what's vital to understand right up top is that this isn't some fluffy manifestation guide. It's not about thinking yourself rich.
Right, no vision boards here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're looking at a rigid, highly logical framework. It's where absolute grinding poverty intersects with the investment strategies of the top 1%.
Yeah.
So to really get value out of this, you're going to need to challenge some deeply held cultural assumptions, like, following your passion or the holiness of home ownership.
Definitely. Which brings us right to lesson 1, this scarcity advantage. Stop playing the victim.
Yes. To understand Christie's financial superpower, we have to look at those beginnings. Her childhood stories in the text are staggering.
Oh, absolutely staggering.
She talks about literally digging through a hazardous medical waste heap just to find discarded rubber bands.
Wow.
Yeah, she and her friends would tie them together to make a jump rope. And then there's the story of her first can of Coca-Cola.
Right, the nosebleed story.
Exactly. It was such a sensory overload, like such an intensely exciting luxury for a child in poverty, that it literally gave her a nosebleed.
That sounds incredibly extreme, but it perfectly illustrates what the sources call the scarcity mindset. But wait, don't business books usually say a scarcity mindset holds you back?
Yeah, they do.
Like you're so focused on the pennies you miss the dollars.
They do say that, but they completely misunderstand the mechanism of scarcity. The source material references this fascinating 1945 University of Minnesota starvation study.
Okay, what did that show?
Well, researchers found that when subjects were deprived of food, their brains completely rewired. They didn't just get sad, they became obsessively hyper-focused.
Really? Like how?
They were memorizing entire cookbooks and tracking minute changes in grocery prices. When you lack a critical resource, your brain forces an intense optimization of it.
I see.
Christy credits this exact mindset for teaching her what she calls CRP. That stands for creativity, resilience, adaptability, and perseverance.
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of having a tight deadline on a major school paper.
Oh, good analogy.
Right. When time is abundant, you procrastinate. But when time is scarce, like when you only have 3 hours left, you become a tornado of productivity.
You really do?
You shut out every distraction because the scarcity forces you to optimize.
That is a perfect way to look at it. Business books frame scarcity as a negative because they assume you want infinite comfortable options, but scarcity forces you to identify invisible waste.
Invisible waste.
Yeah, when you have absolutely nothing, you suddenly see exactly how much everyone else throws away. Like, the text notes that American society throws away 11 million tons of clothing a year.
That's insane.
It is. Scarcity turns those everyday constraints into a superpower because you learn how to extract maximum value from absolute minimum resources.
So, if scarcity gives you this superpower to spot invisible waste, how does that translate to picking a career? Because someone in survival mode probably isn't listening to modern advice about following their heart.
Which perfectly sets up lesson 2. Don't follow your passion. Do this instead.
Right.
Christy argues that follow your passion is actually some of the most dangerous financial advice you can give a young person.
It sounds lovely on paper, though.
It does, but it completely ignores the mathematics of survival. Instead, she advocates for a strict mathematical filter called the POT score, which stands for pay over tuition.
Let's break down how that actually works.
The formula is brutally objective. You take the median salary above minimum wage for a specific job, and you divide it by the total cost of the degree required to get it.
Okay.
So, for example, if a degree costs $100,000, but the passion-driven career only pays $35,000 a year, your POT score is terrible.
Oh, yeah. You're mathematically setting yourself up for decades of crippling debt.
Exactly. You have to follow the math first so you can afford to follow your passion later. Christie only became a children's author, which was her true passion after she retired as a millionaire.
That's so smart. I mean, encouraging an 18-year-old to base their entire expensive education on their current teenage passion, it's like telling them they have to exclusively dress like their favorite high school band for the rest of their life.
Right.
Imagine wearing frosted tips and studded belts to the corporate office every single day just because you loved it when you were 17.
Exactly. Passions change. And more importantly, turning a passion into a job often completely ruins the passion.
Because of the financial stress.
Precisely. Work is rarely fun when you're terrified about where your next paycheck is coming from, or if you can afford rent. Following the POT score secures your survival first.
Okay, so you run the POT score and you get a high-paying, practical job. Society tells you the very next step is buying a house. But the sources aggressively push back on this, which brings us to lesson 3. The big housing lie. Your house is not an investment.
This is a massive cultural obsession, especially in immigrant families where owning property is equated with absolute safety.
Right, the text shares that hilarious but terrifying story of the scary house.
Oh my goodness, yes. Christy and Bryce looked at this property. It had a literal caving roof, terrible wiring. It smelled horrific. It was falling apart.
And it's still sold in a bidding war for $800,000.
Which just proves how irrational the market gets.
But wait, renting is just throwing money away.
Right.
Right. You're paying someone else's mortgage instead of building your own equity. That's what we're all taught.
And that is the ultimate myth of the middle class. The math on home ownership is brutal, but it's hidden behind the pride of ownership.
In how?
Well, over a 9-year average stay in a home, look at what you actually pay mechanically. You pay title fees up front. Then every year, 0.5% in insurance, 1% in property taxes.
Plus the maintenance, right?
Exactly, 1 to 3% in mandatory maintenance, like fixing boilers or roofs.
Yeah.
And then a massive 6% broker fee when you finally sell. By the end, the bank and the government have gotten rich off your payments.
And the homeowner.
Their slice of the pie is tiny. If you're using a standard mortgage, your actual cash-in-hand gain is often just 2% of the total appreciation.
Wow.
To figure out if renting is actually throwing money away, the text introduces the rule of 150.
Okay, what's that?
To see the true, unhidden monthly cost of owning a home, you must multiply your monthly mortgage payment by 150%.
So that extra 50% accounts for taxes, maintenance, and insurance.
You got it. If that final number is higher than what you would pay in rent for a similar place, you should definitively rent. The text states a core, uncomfortable thesis. Poor people buy stuff. The middle class buys houses.
Yeah.
Rich people buy investments.
Wow. So if we aren't blowing our paychecks on a massive mortgage, where's the money going? Well, often it's hijacked by our own brain chemistry.
Which leads us to lesson 4, escaping the hedonic treadmill, dopamine and spending.
Yes. Christy is very transparent in the book. She admits she went through a major purse junkie phase early in her career.
She bought, 5 luxury Coach purses in just a few weeks?
Yeah, exactly. But she realized a strange pattern. She was chasing a high that kept fading faster and faster each time she swiped her credit card. Here's where it gets really interesting. The source actually compares buying luxury items to building a tolerance to a drug. They use a cocaine analogy.
And it's neurologically accurate. The brain's reward center, the nucleus accumbens, processes dopamine based on relative expectations, not absolute levels.
Interesting.
Yeah, when you buy your first luxury item, your baseline expectation is low, so the dopamine hit is massive.
Yeah.
You feel amazing.
But then the baseline adjusts.
Exactly. Your brain quickly adjusts its new baseline to expect luxury. That is the hedonic treadmill. You literally have to buy a more expensive purse or a faster car just to feel the exact same high you felt the first time.
You have to keep running faster just to stay in the same place.
Precisely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals that not all spending is equal. I mean, possessions give you a temporary high, and then they inevitably turn into unexpected maintenance costs.
Right. You have to clean the purse, store the car, insure the jewelry.
Exactly. Experiences, on the other hand, like travel or learning a skill, they provide lasting happiness. You get the anticipation, the joy of the experience, and the memories, all without the burden of ownership.
You're basically shifting your spending from depreciating liabilities to appreciating memories.
I love that. So we've cut out bad housing debt and stepped off the consumption treadmill. We have cash, it's time to invest. But if you walk into a traditional bank for help, you're walking into a trap.
Lesson 5. The real bank robbers. Why Wall Street hates you.
Yes, Christie shares this incredibly tense story of confronting a bank salesperson.
Oh, that guy. He was aggressively pushing her to buy this actively managed super fund that was secretly just wrapped in other expensive funds.
Right, and he wouldn't let her speak to the actual manager. He just kept pushing this proprietary black box algorithm.
It's so shady.
But shouldn't we pay experts to manage our money? I mean, we pay a mechanic to fix a car or a doctor to diagnose an illness because they know more than we do.
What's fascinating here is that, unlike mechanics or doctors, these financial experts usually fail at their one specific job.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the data is clear. 85% of active mutual fund managers fail to beat the basic market index after their fees are accounted for.
Wow, 85%.
Because that salesperson is making a commission and the bank is extracting a yearly management fee. Let's look at the devastating mathematical power of a seemingly tiny 1% management fee.
I mean, 1% sounds like absolutely nothing, just a rounding error.
That's exactly how they sell it. But over a 25-year investing timeline, because you lose the compound interest on that 1% every single year, that tiny fee can actually eat up more than your entire initial investment.
That is horrifying.
It is. Instead, the sources advocate for index investing, which simply means buying a low-cost fund that tracks the entire stock market.
And Wall Street hates that.
Wall Street hates index funds because they let you piggyback off the collective growth of the economy without paying their exorbitant salaries. You are essentially bypassing Wall Street altogether.
Okay, so we are saving aggressively, avoiding fees, and investing in broad index funds. But what is the actual finish line? How do you know when you can stop working?
That brings us to lesson 6, the 4% rule. The math that buys your freedom. This is where all the math finally converges.
Right, the Trinity University study.
Exactly. Researchers looked at decades of historical stock and bond market data, through wars, depressions, booms, you name it, to find a safe withdrawal rate for retirement.
And what did they find?
They found that if you withdraw exactly 4% of your investment portfolio annually and adjust that dollar amount for inflation each year, you have a 95% chance of your money lasting 30 years without ever running out.
And if we flip that math around to figure out our target number, it becomes the rule of 25. You take your annual living expenses and simply multiply them by 25. For Christy and Bryce, they realized their optimized travel-heavy lifestyle only cost $40,000 a year. Multiply $40,000 by 25, and they needed exactly $1 million in index funds to quit their jobs forever. So what does this all mean?
It's incredibly freeing.
It's like a magical engine that runs purely on its own exhaust. If the market grows by an average of 7% and you only pull out 4%, the engine just keeps regenerating power. You never have to stop for gas.
It's a brilliant self-sustaining mechanism, and what it really does is force a profound psychological shift.
In what way?
You move entirely away from the scarcity mindset, where you are constantly trading your precious life energy just for basic survival, and you step into the freedom mindset. Your money is finally deployed to buy back your time.
But wait, what about the 5% of people in that Trinity study who did go broke? How do we survive a massive stock market crash?
That is the exact fear addressed in Lesson 7, the cash cushion and yield shield, crash-proofing your life.
Yeah, the text explicitly mentions Christie's extreme panic during the 2008 financial crash.
Watching your life savings plummet is terrifying, especially if you don't have a paycheck coming in anymore to buy groceries.
Right, because if the market is down 30% and you are forced to sell your stocks to pay rent, you are locking in those massive losses.
Exactly. That fear is based on a real mathematical danger called sequence of return risk.
Which is what, Zach?
The absolute worst thing that can happen is the stock market crashing the exact year you retire. To fix this, you need a two-part backup plan. First, a cash cushion reserve cash sitting safely in a bank. Second, a yield shield.
Okay, let's unpack this. What is a yield shield mechanically?
Think of your standard stock portfolio like an apple orchard. Normally, to get your $40,000 in retirement, you might have to chop down a few trees every year and sell the wood.
Okay, I follow.
If a storm hits, like a market crash, and the price of wood dropped drastically, you have to chop down twice as many trees just to eat. Eventually, you run out of trees. That's sequence of return risk.
Makes total sense. So how does the shield work?
A yield shield shifts your investments into assets that pay high cash dividends and interest. Instead of chopping down the trees to sell the wood, you're just harvesting the apples that the trees produce naturally every single quarter.
Oh, that's smart.
Even if the overall market value of the orchard drops during a crash, you aren't selling the trees. You're just living off the cash yield they generate directly into your account.
But doesn't holding 5 years of living expenses in pure cash mean you are missing out on massive stock market gains? If they need $40,000 a year, that's $200,000 just sitting in a bank account doing nothing.
And that is exactly where the yield shield saves the day. Let's clarify the math. Because the yield shield is generating 2.5 to 3.5% in cash dividends naturally, you aren't pulling the full $40,000 from your cash reserves.
So the cash needed drops.
Drastically. Because of those apples you're harvesting, the raw cash they needed to keep on hand dropped from $200,000 down to just $25,000. It's an incredibly elegant mathematical safety net.
That is elegant. So your investments are crash-proofed, but there's another powerful entity trying to take your money, which is the government. Let's go to lesson 8. Taxes are for poor people. How to legally pay $0 to the IRS.
This is a provocative title, but the math backs it up. The source highlights a shocking fact. Christie hasn't paid a single dollar in taxes since she retired. Not $1.
I mean, is this some shady offshore Cayman Islands trick? Are they funneling money through shell corporations?
Not at all. It is 100% legal and above board. It's about understanding how the tax code is engineered.
Engineered like a game.
Exactly. The system is effectively a game. Employment income, your standard W-2 paycheck, and interest income from a bank are taxed the absolute worst. But qualified dividends and long-term capital gains are taxed the most favorably.
How favorably? Exactly.
In the U.S. tax system, for lower and middle income brackets, the tax rate on long-term capital gains and qualified dividends is exactly 0%.
Wait, 0%?
0%. If a married couple pulls $40,000 a year entirely from these investment gains, they fall perfectly into that 0% bracket. The standard deduction wipes out any remaining liability.
Wow.
The middle class gets taxed heavily because they rely entirely on W-2 employment and they own property, which guarantees yearly property wealth taxes.
Regardless of whether the house goes up or down in value.
Right. The wealthy hold investments that return money as capital gains, which the government taxes at much lower rates to encourage investment.
Okay, but what happens if the math is too tight in an expensive city, or you encounter a massive, prolonged bear market, or even the dividends dry up? You physically move. Which brings us to lesson 9. Geographic arbitrage. Get paid to travel the world.
This is Christian Brace's ultimate failsafe. It's called geographic arbitrage.
Which means
Earning your money in a strong currency, like US or Canadian dollars, but physically spending it in a weak currency. They use this as backup plan number 3.
so if the market dips severely, they don't panic.
Nope. They just dropped their $40,000 cost of living down to $24,000 by traveling to places like Thailand or Mexico. As they put it, if shit hits the fan, we're going to Thailand.
Isn't this just running away from the real world, though? I mean, how do you deal with things like healthcare or inflation when you're just jumping around the globe?
This raises an important question, but geographic arbitrage actually solves those exact fears.
How does it solve them?
When you are untethered from a specific expensive city, you can literally control your personal inflation rate. If rent goes up in Toronto, you move to Lisbon. If Lisbon gets pricey, you move to Chiang Mai.
And healthcare.
Out-of-pocket medical care in many places abroad is vastly cheaper and often higher quality than paying for premium insurance and deductibles in the U.S. You are geo-hacking your living expenses to protect your portfolio.
That's wild. So we've geo-hacked our location, we're dodging Wall Street fees, and we're legally minimizing taxes. Bringing all these formulas together reveals one ultimate, surprising truth about building wealth.
Yes. Lesson 10, savings rate income, money, extends time.
Let's get into it.
When you run the math through all these filters, the single biggest determinant of when you can retire is your savings rate, not your absolute income.
Wait, really? It's not about making a massive salary.
Surprisingly, no. The source gives a great mathematical example. A family making $62,000 a year, but aggressively optimizing their spending to save 24% of it will actually reach financial independence faster than someone making millions of dollars who spends every single dime they earn on mansions and luxury cars.
Because of the 4% rule.
Exactly. The math of the 4% rule relies entirely on your living expenses. The lower your expenses, the smaller the portfolio you need to sustain them forever.
Okay, I have to ask you directly on behalf of the listener, are you just supposed to live like a hermit forever? No lattes, no restaurants, no fun, just hoarding pennies in the dark until you're old.
Not at all. And this is the profound psychological shift the book builds toward. You transition from thinking time equals money to money equals time.
Okay, I like that.
It isn't about deprivation. It's about asking yourself a very serious, life-altering question. How much time am I willing to spend working for someone else?
Right.
When you view it that way, a $50 dinner isn't just $50. It might be 2 days of your life spent sitting in a cubicle.
Right.
Every dollar you choose to save isn't a dollar denied. It's a dollar that buys back a literal piece of your freedom.
What an incredible journey. I mean, we followed Christy from playing with discarded rubber bands in a medical waste dump to achieving a life of complete, uncompromised freedom. She hacked the math of the modern world entirely on her own terms.
And that leaves us with a lot to consider. Consider this. What if the traditional American dream of homeownership, luxury car payments, and endless consumption wasn't actually designed to make you happy?
That's a scary thought.
What if it was perfectly engineered to keep you on the hedonic treadmill, ensuring you remain a compliant employee, paying a 1% management fee to Wall Street until the day you die?
Thank you for watching.
Hey.
Please like, share, subscribe, follow up in next video.